Thank you. To the next slide so we can go ahead and get started. Okay. Just some housekeeping things before we introduce ourselves and the speakers for today. We do want to say we know that this is a long session today and that it overlaps with lunchtime. So if you need to eat, please take a moment to eat. But if you are at a place where you can turn on your camera and join us, please do. We're really hoping that folks will engage, they will ask lots of questions, and there will be plenty of time for discussion as well. So please come on camera if you can. Like I said, there will be plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have questions as the presenters are talking, please drop them in the chat and we will be compiling them and getting to them after the presentation. If for any reason you have some tech issues during the session, here's an email address that you can write to. We will help you either reconnect with the session or resolve the issue that you're having. And like many of you already saw, this event is being recorded. So if you miss something, the recording and the slides will be posted later. If you'd like to see captions, captions are also available at the bottom. So you can get a transcript of all the things folks are saying. So with that said, I want to take us to the agenda. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Maggie Acosta, and I work in the Collaboratory for Health Justice at the UIC School of Public Health. We are working with the city to host grant writing supports for all of you and the work you do across Chicago. And we have a good agenda of speakers today. So a lot of it is going to be engagement focused. So we are going to do a quick overview of the nonprofit capacity building program, which many of you are probably pretty familiar with. If not, we'll do a quick refresher. And then we're going to jump right into content. So we're going to have two presenters today from research services at UIC, talk about how to make sense of all of the grants that are out there and finding the ones that are a good fit for the work you do. Then we're going to take a quick break if folks need to stretch, get water, get some silence, get food. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back and talk more about evaluation now. So we're going to get into some of the program planning and thinking about the impact in the work that you do. Then we're going to do a quick wrap up. We're going to ask for your feedback. So we really do plan these sessions around the things that we hear from you all and what you need. So we hope that you will give us feedback on what we can do better next time and some sessions that will be helpful to you in your work. So next slide, please. All right, so just to kind of level set, I imagine some folks in the room have been to a lot of the sessions in the nonprofit capacity building program, but if there are folks who are just joining and you've been to maybe one or two sessions, we do want to do a reminder that all of these trainings are a part of the nonprofit capacity building program, which is an effort to help small businesses and nonprofits recover from the impacts of the pandemic. Specifically helping to fund and staff the work that really y'all bared the burden of during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are doing a broad range of services for you all to help you prepare for the grant funds, and those come in 4 forms. So one of them is the readiness summits. Those happen on a quarterly basis. The next one is happening in June. There will be more information coming about that. There are also webinars like this one that happen on a monthly basis, but there are also supports that are available week to week. So there are weekly small group workshops where you can meet other folks and do some activities. And then if you want one-on-one assistance and you have questions specific to your organization, you can also sign up for a one-on-one consultation. So that's a quick overview of this program. If you want, you can also go to the website and there will be a lot more information about the program for you all there. Next slide, please. Okay, and just so folks know, this is a quick snapshot of some of the events coming up. So if you want to take a screenshot, you can find, or you can keep track of all of the upcoming events in the next month. this is also available on the website. So if you miss any of these right now, or if you want to sign up for any of these, your one-stop shop is going to be the website. So the team is going to drop the website in the chat if you want to go sign up for any of these other sessions, or if you want to sign up for a one-on-one. So quick overview. And with that, I think we're going to jump into the content for today. So the first session, we're going to have speakers talk about all the kinds of grants that are out there and how to make sense of it and finding one that is a good fit for you. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest speakers for today. We're going to have Robin Sylvester, who is the Director of Research Services, and Olivia DeSormo, who is the Assistant Director of Research Services. So I'm going to pass it off to you all for our content for today.
Thank you, Maggie. Olivia and I are really pleased to be here today, and just to let you know a little bit more about us. So we work with a team in the School of Public Health that helps about 5 different departments in our college apply for grants. And we submit about 50 to 60 grants per year. A lot of those are federal grant applications, but we also submit applications to other funding sources as well. So that's our background, and we'll share what we know with you today. We can go to the next slide. So what I'm going to cover today, along with Olivia, are sources of funding, how to determine or how to think about what might be the right fit. We'll talk about some of the grant search tools that are applicable to each of the funding sources that we cover in the beginning. And then we'll just briefly touch on understanding applicant requirements that you might encounter during your grant application process. Next. All right, so to get us started, we'll talk a little bit about government funding sources. Government funding via grants often happens at all of the levels of government. And one thing that I wanted to point out to everyone on this call is that a lot of times funding from one level will flow through to another level. And I think that that's something that people forget, and it's a really great thing to understand, because sometimes when we're working at the local level, we can go to a local government agency or a state government agency to receive federal funding that they have already applied for and are obligated to then re-grant out to smaller grants. And then next. So some things to understand about government funding is that there usually our grants are coordinated by a department or agency within that government entity that has a specific focus. So the example here is the EPA. Their focus is going to be environment. Generally it's not a grant that's made by, just the state of Illinois. Instead, it will be a grant made by the state of Illinois Department of Natural Resources. The state and local government often redistribute federal funds via their departments, and there's a couple of examples there on the right-hand side via logos. For us, for public health, we may receive a good bit of funding from, say, a federal agency such as CDC that's been redistributed through the Illinois Department of Public Health. So that's an example of how that works. Government funding is offered as either a grant, which is an assistance mechanism, or a contract, which is a purchase of services or goods. And for today's purposes, we're mostly going to focus on the grant type mechanisms, but I did just want to point out that contracts are another way to receive government funding. So grant funds must support a specific scope of work or program. So they're not gifts, they come with strings attached. What you say you're going to do when you apply for a grant, you have to do it, or else you risk having to give money back, especially to government agencies that are held accountable. Government grants must comply with specific rules because they are funded by your tax dollars. And obviously we want our tax dollars to be used well. And then the application process requires careful preparation and can be highly competitive, especially for larger awards. Next. So in addition to government funding, there's also other types of funding sources, and I've kind of lumped these all together as non-governmental funding sources. And so some of these are a voluntary agency or public charity. So an example would be the American Cancer Society or Susan G. Komen Foundation. Independent foundations, often these are family foundations. I've given an example here of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. MacArthur Foundation is another one that we're familiar with here in Chicago. Corporate foundations or corporate giving programs. So often large corporations, have a set aside of funds that they can distribute via grants or other types of giving. And then community foundations. So these are usually supported by multiple local donors. And then they fund a specific geographic area. So one that we have here in Chicago is the Chicago Community Trust. And things to know about non-governmental funding. So these funders tend to be very mission driven. They're focused on specific funding priorities, which may be driven by a programmatic area, a population served, or a geographic area. They make their own rules, so they may or may not fund certain activities. So a common thing that you will see is that maybe some don't want to fund general operating expenses. Some don't fund research, and some do fund these things. So it's important to look at what they are intending to fund and to make sure that whatever you are asking aligns with their rules for the specific funder. And then sometimes these organizations require an invitation to apply, or perhaps a letter of intent in order to obtain an invitation to apply. So kind of after we've thought about the different types of funding sources, I think it's good to think about, what is the process for how you go about navigating these funding sources? And it's a good thing to think about how can you take a proactive approach rather than a reactive one. So a lot of times we find that there's a moment in time where maybe we run out of money and then we're urgently scrambling to find a source of funding. But searching for grant funding, it's really best or most successful if it's more of an ongoing process. And it's something that I think is good if you can build this into your your work schedule. So a process that you can repeat over and over again, let's say, on a weekly or a monthly basis, so that you can kind of build a kind of curated list of places to look for grants, funders that might be a good fit for you, listservs that might help you find grants, contacts that might help you find grants. Putting all of that together will really help you in the long run to be successful. And this is an article that I have shared multiple times. It's really just a one-page article, but it really just does a good job of saying just that. Like, you really need to take this proactive approach to assessing grant makers and searching for grants. And they lay out this 5-step process, and that is to prioritize your funding needs, do the research or search for grants, but do a deeper dive on the different funding sources, cultivate relationships, and then make a good ask. So just to dig a little bit more into those different steps. So when you're doing the basic research, you're going to want to become familiar with a variety of funders that might have shared interests with your organization. A key kind of term that I see a lot for funders is funding priorities, and that might be something you want to search for when you're looking over their websites. Also, be aware of the geographic area that they serve. Sometimes I will see a funder that's a really great fit and then realize that they only serve, a region or a state or a city. Once you've kind of collected a number of funders who you think have potential to be a good fit, then it might be a good idea to take a deeper dive into each of those. You can look at their websites, take a look at their strategic plans, what current funding opportunities are open. And then past awards is something that most funders will post it somewhere. And I find this really helpful. So a lot of times I will think, oh, this is a great funding opportunity. It's a really good fit for us. And then I'll take a look at those past awards, and then I'll realize, no, that wasn't really quite, even though what they wrote is what I interpreted to be a good fit, based on what I'm seeing that they're funding, I think that they're funding something that is a little bit different than what we do. Sometimes there will be a program contact on a funder website who you can reach out to get a feel for whether it's a good fit. An example of this is the National Institutes for Health. So we apply to those grants a lot, and they always have a program contact. And they are available to consult with our researchers to determine whether the project that they're proposing is a good fit for the institute at the NIH. So not all funders have that, but some do. And so that's, if that opportunity is there, then I definitely recommend taking it. Other ways you can gather information, and sometimes from news outlets, press releases, or social media. Especially for smaller funders that maybe don't have a lot of resources to get their kind of calls for funding out there or information about their funding programs. Sometimes you'll just encounter those in some of these places. And then also cultivating relationships is really important. So who are your peers in the work that you do? Where are they getting their funding? What can they share with you about how they've been successful? And then also, are there groups or say email listservs that you can join? So I receive tons of emails from listservs, and I find that a great way to just kind of stay on the pulse of what's happening with funding. Okay, next. So, you've been looking at different funders and you're getting a feel for their funding priorities. It would be good to take a look at what your organization's needs are. So what do you want to fund? Is it a specific program? Is it general operations? How do these activities align with funder interests? How much funding do you need to be successful? Are you looking to fund just a pilot activity to see if it works, that you need, maybe $30,000 to just try a couple of things? Or are you looking to fund a 5-year program that's going to require a couple of million of dollars to keep running? What is a realistic amount of funding based on the available funds? So funds that the funder might be able to offer you, and also your capacity to manage the grant. So most funders don't want to give out a large grant to an organization that hasn't demonstrated capacity to manage a large grant already. And then will our organization be eligible for certain types of funding? So is a 501c3 status required to apply? Would be an example of a requirement that affects your eligibility. And then what partners might be involved in the proposed activities? How should they be involved? And will they also require funding? So often if we're working with partners, we need to take into account that they also have funding needs. And if they're going to participate in the activity, that they will also be a component of our request for grant funding. Okay, next. All right, so that brings us to our first breakout session. We're going to break you out into groups of, I think, about 8 or 9, so that you can just talk through some of these discussion questions and get to know each other a little bit better, and kind of think about building your network. So once we come back together, we will also just share a couple of responses to the very last question here, which is, have you been involved in networks or groups that helped you find funding in the past? And that will help us share with everyone any kind of resources that you all are bringing to the table. And there is a link in the chat there to the breakout activity slide, which is on a Google Drive. And you have about 10 minutes. All right, great. Well, I hope that you all had a chance to meet some new folks in your breakout sessions. Is there any networks or groups that you learned about that you would like to share? If so, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat so that everybody on this call can benefit from that information. And Goody, we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. All right, so the next part of this, we're going to get into a little bit more on how to search for funding or where to search for funding. And Olivia is going to get us started with this section.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia. I will be doing the searching for funding and deciding to apply. So Goody, next slide. Thank you. There's a lot of different places where you can find funding. If you're looking for federal funding, there's going to be some main locations to do that. The big one is grants.gov. All federal grant opportunities are posted here. And a lot of other research engines actually base themselves off of grants.gov. So this will be the most comprehensive place and most up-to-date location where you can find any of these opportunities. And we will be doing a walkthrough of grants.gov so you can get an idea of what that looks like. Federal contract opportunities, so purchase orders and things like that, will be through sam.gov. And then there'll be other websites for particular agencies. So the CDC will list their own grants. The Administration for Child and Families will list grants. It's a little bit cleaner sometimes if you know exactly what particular focus you're looking for or a particular agency you want to look for. You could go to their agency website to go ahead and get a start there. And go to the next slide. There is not a fee for grant.gov, no. So this is what the homepage of grants.gov looks like. You can search and apply for all federal grants here. You do need to register in order to save searches, to subscribe to updates, things like that. It's really helpful to do that because if you do find something you're interested in applying for, you can subscribe, and whenever it's updated, you will get that information. This is where all of the full funding announcement information will be posted. So the application packages will be here. All of the information that you need in order to apply will be located here. We can go to the next slide. So when you place a search on this site, this is the general table you will see. There are a lot of filters and sort functions that you can use that will really help narrow down the thousands of grants that are listed here. And see what would work for you, what's best for your agency, what's best for the area that you are trying to get funding for. If you see the top right bubble there, that is the drop-down menu where you're searching kind of by the date range. So you could see things that have just recently been posted, things that have been there a while. If you have the lookout for something and you know kind of the date range it may have been posted in, this could be helpful. On the left here is a lot of other search fields. This is really helpful if you, for instance, want to look it up by eligibility. This could be a way to weed out all of the grants that are just for government or just for higher education, just for any other category that does not fit you. So you can kind of go through the eligibility, see which category your agency is, and then only see grants that you can apply for rather than ones that may not be eligible for you anyways. You can also look up the type of funding here. So if it's a cooperative agreement, if it's a grant, if it's a contract, that will be an option you can look up, as well as who's funding it. So if it's a particular agency that you're looking for something under, you can select that agency over on the left. Next. Once you click one of those items, it will look like this screen that's on the left here. It'll have all of your basic information about the application and the opportunity on this main synopsis page. And then if you see those blue tabs along the top, it'll show one where you can go click and see the version history, one where you can see related documents, and then one that has the whole package underneath. If you go under related documents, this is where you can find the funding opportunity announcement, request for applications, or the actual text of the announcement. And it may look like something on the right. This will be a downloadable file that you can get. They'll give you all the information that you need to know about the grant. Next. So USA Spending is another place that you can go to kind of get an idea of maybe where you should be looking. You can view a history of where different agencies have spent their money, how much money they've spent. You can look at what's happened in your area, what's happened around certain years. So this could help you get an idea of past spending to see if that matches up with possibly your organization or your mission. You can see other organizations that are similar to yours, and you can see what awards they may have received. And then this will also give you a way to look for agency websites and look up specific programs. Next. Oh, yep. And then if you're looking for more state funding, then that will be through the Illinois Catalog of State Financial Assistance. You can also subscribe to this listserv here in order to get a weekly email with funding opportunities in it. All of them will not necessarily apply to you, but it is a good place to kind of get that coming to you so you can weed through those and see what may work out. There are also several different department sites that you can go to and search through those if, for instance, you're looking for something specifically from the Department of Public Health or specifically from the Department of Human Services. And then on a little bit lower level, we have Cook County funding. These are a couple of sites that have specifically where funding for the Cook County level would be, as well as the City of Chicago procurement options, and then the recovery plan, where they actually help post a lot of things there. The Cook County Workforce Partnership is another area where you may find funding, and it's not quite the same as getting funding just from the City of Chicago or Cook County, but it is kind of on the same level of region. Next. And then what are some other search tools that are out here? How would you find things other than grants.gov, other than these ones that we've talked about? There are paid search engines. For instance, Foundation Directory Online, which at some libraries you may be able to access for free. There's Grant Watch, there's Grant Gopher. Nonprofits and foundations, their websites and listservs may be something that you can sign up for. For instance, if you really liked MacArthur Foundation funding, you could go and sign up for their updates. Then when they put something out, you would know. There's also networks, for instance, My Forefront, that you can join to help get information on these funding announcements. Philanthropy News Digest has some RFPs listed that you could go see. And then you can also do web searches that are really tailored to your focus, but then add the site, whether it's a government site, org site, EDU site. This might help you find what is particular for your focus rather than just getting a larger list that you have to comb through. Next. So we'll do a demonstration now of what grants.gov is like. You can definitely follow along, or you can try your own search on your own computer by going to grants.gov. Okay. So here's what the homepage of grants.gov looks like when you log in. It has across the top a lot of different banners for where you want to go. And then here are some shortcuts as well. Let me see. And then up here will be your account and then the logout button. So if you wanted to, you could use the search bar right here to search for something. You can also go to the search grants tab here. Once you do that, it will open that table that we saw earlier that has an area for you to put in keywords. You can see that it lists the opportunity number, the title, what agency it's from, if it's posted, or if it's forecasted, which means they're expecting to post it, and then what date it was posted, and then when the application is due. Right now, we're showing things that have been posted and things that are expected to come out. So for instance, we only want to look at what is out right now. We can unclick forecasted and it automatically updates it for us. So if we were looking up environmental justice, for instance, put that in search. All of these are grants or opportunities that would have to do with that. We can go over here and we can look if we want just cooperative opportunities. If we specifically want grants, we can click right there. It's narrowed the list down a little further. So instead of the several thousand, we're only down to 600 now. So that's getting easier to look through. Eligibilities. Let's see, we're going through for a nonprofit that does not have a 501c3. We could click there and that narrows it down even further. Now we're at 132 applications from different agencies that we can see. We can see ones that were just posted in the last week, and then we're down to 4. So if this is kind of something that you've built into your daily routine, your weekly routine, and every week you go and search, then you could narrow this down to what's been posted in the last week and just see the new items. And then when you click an opportunity number, it brings up that synopsis page. So it'll give you the very basic information about the grant, who is eligible to apply, and then the agency name here. You have the funding amount they're expecting, you have the dates for when the items are due, and then you also have the apply and subscribe buttons. If you're interested in this funding announcement, you would want to subscribe. This means if they update it, if they change anything, all of that, you will get an email letting you know it has been changed, rather than you having to come to this page and seeing if anything has changed yourself. The version history here shows if things have been changed in the past. So we can see there's only been one synopsis here. And then under related documents is where you can download the final version of the funding opportunity announcement. And then package is just some information about the application package. So if you were to apply for this one, you could either click apply up here or apply here. If you wanted to see what the application would look like, you can click preview and then you can preview the forms that way.
So, and one thing to note about the keyword search is that I think it's matching any words, not all words.
Mm-hmm.
So you would want to make sure that you are looking for things that are a match that you were actually looking for, or else use quotation marks if you want to match a specific phrase. Sometimes that can exclude things that might have been a match for you. When I search grants.gov, I will often search, skim most of the opportunities, but sort by agency and then limit it to those that have been posted in the last week or so that I can see everything that's been posted and kind of skip over agencies that I'm not interested in, but then look for agencies that I know or think usually post things that are a good fit for us. This is kind of the way I approach this, because we have such a wide area of subject matter to cover. If you have a more focused area of subject matter, then you might come up with a better search for you. Especially maybe there's really only one agency you're interested in, then you could easily limit it to that agency.
And then if you do find a search that's built out how you like, and you're getting things that really fit your organization well, you can save the search here. And then that'll be easier for you to access every time you log in.
Also, if you save a search, I believe there's an option to have it email you the search results. So if you get new hits, it will come directly to your email.
Robin, was there anything else that we wanted to cover in the demo?
I think that's all. I just note that it's free to sign up for an account. So there's no charge. You just put in your email address. And if you have an organization that you're affiliated with, then you would affiliate yourself with the organization's account. That's really only necessary if you're going to apply for grants through grants.gov. If you're just an individual searching for grants, then you don't have to do that organizational affiliation part. And you can just, once you have an account, log in, search, save your searches, set up those automatic emails.
And you can do that through login.gov or by clicking the login up there.
All right, thank you, Goody. So let's say we've been searching on grants.gov or another search system, and we found a funding opportunity. The next thing we need to think about is it a good fit, and should we apply? So up at the top of this slide, I have kind of an overview of the application process. And these are kind of all the things that need to happen for a grant over its lifetime. So identify the funding opportunity, determine the eligibility and fit, which we're talking about now, fulfill the applicant requirements, write and submit the grant by the deadline. And then if you are awarded the grant, you need to be able to implement the program, manage funds, and report on the activities. So these are all stages of the grant that you need to think about as you're considering whether you want to pursue this application. So read the funding opportunity carefully. I can't stress enough that it's really important to read it in detail if you have gotten to the point where you intend to apply. An important thing that you will need to determine upfront is whether you are eligible. So with grants, eligibility is really important. It's an issue that there's not really flexibility on. There's not flexibility on eligibility, and there's not flexibility on the deadline. Will our application be competitive is something that you want to consider, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then could this funding lead to other funding in the future? And I put this question on here because sometimes, let's say you're a smaller organization and you haven't had a lot of grants. Sometimes getting a small grant to help you kind of pilot an activity can be a way for you to get a larger grant in the future. So maybe it's not it's not what you would want in an ideal world. In an ideal world, you would want to fund your entire program up front, but sometimes you need to take that step first to fund a smaller little test case so that you can get that larger funding in the future. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about, will our application be competitive? So this is back to some of that research you did earlier about funding priorities. So does the project align with the priorities of the funder and the stated purpose? So part of that's the funder's priorities, and then also the purpose that's going to be described in the call for proposals or the funding opportunity announcement. You really need to have a match there. If there's not a match, then it would be very difficult to get the funding under, whatever parameters they've laid out. Can we address all of the required elements or include partners who can? So that's important. Again, they've taken the time to specify what they want to see in an application. The funder has taken the time to specify what they want to see in an application. So you really need to be able to check all of the boxes. Oftentimes, our projects do include partners to help us check the boxes. So, a lot of times for us, being at a larger university, we need partners who maybe have locations or experience in a specific neighborhood or region. So if, for example, it's a certain Chicago neighborhood we need a partner in, then we'll partner with them. If it's a rural area that we need a partner in, then we'll partner with, say, a rural health department. And that helps us to meet whatever that requirement is for the grant. Do we have the bandwidth to develop a proposal by the deadline? I think that's an important one. Some things are just not realistic to do, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to take a pass. If you just learned about a grant opportunity and it's due in 2 days, and there's a lot of requirements, you might have to just let it go and maybe do some research or reach out to the program officer and ask if they'll be offering that again in the future. And if it's a good fit for you, put that on your calendar and start working on it now. Do we have the capacity to implement the project within the funding period? So again, this is important, especially for larger grants. Have you demonstrated the experience to be able to coordinate a large program, manage it financially, and then report both on the programmatic aspects as well as the financial and administrative aspects of the activities? All right, next. So when you're looking at the funding announcements or the call for proposals, there's some key information that I always look for up front before I really dig in, as a way to get a quick feel for, is this even a feasible grant opportunity for us? So eligibility is the number one item that you need to look for. What is the type of applicant? And also, is there a limit to the number of applications that can be submitted? What is the deadline? Is it something that you can meet? What is the purpose or overview? And is that a match with what you're trying to get funding for? What is the budget limit? In one of our smaller groups, we talked about how there were a lot of requirements that didn't really match with what the budget limit, what's being offered. So if you can't meet the scope of work for what they're asking for the money that they're offering, then maybe that's not a good fit for you. And then cost share or matching requirements. There's some grants do have these. So you want to make sure you would be able to meet those if they're required. And sometimes that can be met either, with in-kind or cash. And then required applicant qualifications and capacity. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the applicant requirements at the end of this presentation, but for federal grants, especially, there's a lot of registrations that need to happen. So do you have those? If you don't, do you have time to get those before you apply? If not, can you get them for another round or a similar opportunity in the future? This next one is a really good tip when you're doing a first kind of look at a funding announcement, is to use the keyboard command Control-F to find the words must and should in the announcement. And I learned that in another workshop, and I was like, oh, this is genius. Why didn't I think of this ever before? It's really just a great way, because anything that says you must do, you must do. You can't not do it and expect to get the grant. And if you can't do those things, then you may just need to find another opportunity. And then costs and activities that are not allowable or will not be considered is something you want to watch out for. Sometimes certain types of personnel are not allowed, or indirect costs may not be allowed, or general administrative expenses may not be allowed. And if that's something you really need covered to be able to feasibly do the program, then again, you might need to take a pass. And then review the evaluation or scoring criteria. So there will be a lot of information about what is required in the grant, but often there may be things hidden in that evaluation criteria that really also could be, considered part of that competitiveness. And so if you don't feel that you can meet the evaluation criteria, then you really need to think about how competitive your application is. And, also in relation to, say, how much funding is available, how many awards are going to be made. So say you're applying for, a very large grant, but there's only going to be one award made, and you can't meet all the musts and shoulds, and you can't meet all the evaluation criteria, you may not be that competitive. But let's say a similar grant is going to award 100 awards, and you can meet most of those, but maybe one of the evaluation scoring criteria, you would consider yourself like a 7 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10. Maybe, that's not a bad thing if they're going to be offering 100 awards. So that's just some ways to think about your competitiveness as you're kind of looking at the funding opportunity for the first time. And I think that our next slide, so our next breakout activity is to actually take a look at a couple of sample funding opportunities that we pulled down. So one is Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Grant Making Program, and the other one is Office of Justice Programs Community-Based Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative. And I think that we've got the links to those in the chat there. Those do take you to the grants.gov website, and then you'll need to find the funding opportunity there in the way that Olivia just showed you. So you're going to need to go to that tab for the attachments, or I believe one of these actually has the link on the synopsis page. So they're kind of examples of how the opportunity could be linked in kind of different places. So we'll go to the breakout rooms, and then if everybody could skim those and answer the questions, that will be on the slide in the Google Doc. Hope that you all got to actively participate in that activity. We in our group didn't even really make it through all the questions in 10 minutes. A part of that was technical difficulties on my part pulling up the funding announcement, but still it was a good example of how there's a lot of information packed into these things. And I'm wondering if anybody got to the point of using Control F to find must and should, and if you found any surprises there. And then I have a question in the chat. We were confused about the budget question. Does the budget limit refer to the organization's limit or a limit to what the grant provides? And so that would be the limit to what the grant provides. And then also, how can we download the full PDF announcement from the grants.gov link? Can someone put the grants.gov link in the chat again? And I will just give an example of that, because it's not always straightforward. Okay.
I was gonna say, Robin, if you see it, or I can pull it up and share.
Yeah, I've got it here. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay. So this was the Department of Justice opportunity here, and this is the link took you to this page. There are a couple of places that PDF might be. Usually you will find it here, but this is a good example of this particular agency did not put it here. So I'm going to go back to the synopsis or the landing page and scroll down. This one's using a link to additional information. So I'm going to follow this link. And Department of Justice has put their download on their own website. And so I'm going to download it there. And here is the Department of Justice PDF. And the EPA one was different. The EPA one was under that related docs tab. So sometimes it takes a little bit of digging. It will usually be in one of those two places. If it's not, there's usually a contact person who you can reach out to. There are times when the agency does not actually get the announcement on there right away. You know, on their end, they see different things and they have different experiences using grants.gov. So they don't always know where to put it in their kind of system on their end.
Robin, do you want to show where the budget limits are referred to in that proposal as well?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it here. Go back to share my screen. Oops. Alrighty, so sometimes I will just go ahead and do a find here. So this is going to be, so I searched for budget, which took me to this menu, but then I see it says budget information, which is not really what I want. I see that there's award amounts and duration up here, and that's probably what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go there. And here I can see that their anticipated maximum dollar amount of awards. There's two different categories for this one. So there's 2 million if you're applying for category 1 to 2, or 4 million if you're applying for category 3 to 4. You'll note that the period of duration is 36 months. So that means that in this case, and this is not always the case, but in this case, it looks like that's the total amount over the 36 months. So you would want to divide the 2 million over 3 years, and that would be your budget limit. And that is going to include both your direct and indirect cost in this case. Also, one thing to note here is that the total anticipated funding amount is 72 million. So that's, you know, all of the awards combined are going to have to be under this amount. So you could divide this amount, you know, by these other amounts to get a feel for how many. They've already done that math for you here. So they're going to make 30 to 36 awards. And that's a pretty good number of awards for a program like this, especially for this size. That's a pretty big program. Any other questions that I missed in the chat? Nope. Okay, so we can go back to the slides. All right, so we'll go through this last set of slides, and then we'll have more time for questions at the end, or we can revisit anything. If we want to revisit grants.gov or reading a funding announcement, we can do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about understanding the grant requirements before you apply and what you might encounter. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so for federal applications, if you are the lead applicant, you have to have a SAM.gov registration for your organization. And most federal grants are made to the organization and not the individual. There is a link on this slide to a registration checklist. There are also a lot of resources on SAM.gov about registration, and I believe that there is also a workshop session coming up as part of this series on how to register in SAM.gov. As part of the SAM.gov registration, you will receive a unique entity identifier, or a UEI. This is a 12-character alphanumeric ID that is assigned to your organization by SAM.gov. And in order to obtain this, it requires certifications, representations, and other information about your organization. You may also need a UEI if you are a subrecipient of federal funding. So meaning that another organization is applying as the lead applicant, but you are a key partner in that program and you are receiving flow-through funding as a subrecipient, you may also be required to have a UEI. I won't talk about it a lot here, but there is kind of a less intensive registration if you just need the UEI as say like a sub-award partner versus if you need the full SAM.gov registration. And the UEI is free. So for those of you that might have applied for grants before, you may be familiar with the DUNS number that I believe was not free. It replaced the DUNS number and it is managed by SAM.gov, and you do not have to pay to get the registration. Organizations that want to apply must have an active grants.gov registration with an authorized organization representative. So that's somebody who is legally able to authorize documents for your organization. And then specific agencies may require additional registrations. So as an example, the National Institutes of Health requires an additional registration in ERA Commons, and that's on top of the SAM.gov registration. Other organizations, so a good example is the Department of Justice funding announcement that we just pulled up. They require a registration in a different system called Just Grants. If you're applying for a federal opportunity or perhaps a state opportunity that requires some of these registrations, they can be layered on top of each other. So it could take a while if, say, you need to start with a SAM.gov registration or a UEI registration in order to get the second registration for ERA Commons. So you would want to take, you want to allow probably a month or more if you have not registered in these systems before, if you are going to pursue these applications. You must meet all of these registration requirements before you can apply. Right, next slide. So even if it's not a federal award, you want to review the funder registration requirements early. The process can take several weeks for the various registrations. Some more examples here are the state of Illinois pre-award grant requirements. And I believe that Illinois also requires that SAM.gov registration, or the city of Chicago's iSupplier system for their bid opportunities is another example. Another thing to watch out for is sometimes, perhaps you are newer to your organization and they have existing accounts that haven't been used in a while. Sometimes you have to go back and reactivate those accounts or, reset the logins if you're now responsible for maintaining those accounts and get them up to date. So sometimes you're not able to create, let's say, because an account is old, sometimes you can't abandon it and create a new one. Sometimes you have to update the existing account. So that's something to watch out for. Non-governmental funders use a variety of application platforms, so especially nonprofits. They may have their own system or they may subscribe to a system that other nonprofits use. So as an example, the American Cancer Society uses a platform called Proposal Central. Each platform will require registration and have its own kind of login that you need to set up, and then sometimes profiles that need to be completed and that kind of thing. And then just a note here that if you think you're not applying to federal funding, but it turns out that it is pass-through funding, it may require a SAM.gov registration or at least the UEI registration in addition to any state or local registration requirements. All right, next slide. So in addition to, registering your organization in the various systems or databases, you also want to be prepared to provide organizational information as part of your application. Most applications are going to require this in some format or another, whether they are federal or non-governmental. This is a list of common information that I see requested. So the employer identification number is that tax ID number. Unique entity identifier is that number you get from SAM.gov. The legal applicant name and address for the organization, not the individual. The authorized official or the signing official. So that might be the executive director, the vice president. Indirect cost rate agreement. So if you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, you may need to provide that, or if you have a policy on how indirect costs are charged, you may need to provide that to the funder. Assurances, so that's something that you will often see for federal grants. Sometimes that is part of your SAM.gov registration, and sometimes you need to provide additional assurances with the application itself. Audit reports are something that I commonly see requested from foundation sponsors. Operating budget, annual financial reports, and then a description of your organization mission, capacity, and resources. And it's one of my favorite little memes on the right there about how sometimes that information is requested in a format that is difficult to fulfill. But I highly recommend that, you know, after you've searched for funding opportunities and read a few of them and gotten a feel for the type of information that might be required, that you think about setting up a central location to save some of this information, and where you can pull from it pretty easily, just to at least take one thing off your plate when you're trying to meet a grant deadline and need to collect all of this information for an application. All right, so we put together a list of some homework items here that you can do on your own. No need to report back to us, but these are just some things that you can practice. You can try different funding search tools such as grants.gov. You could visit that USA.gov website as well to look at awards that have been made to organizations like your own. You can research nonprofit or foundations or government agencies that offer grants by program focus, population served, or geographic area. I recommend creating a table of links of websites that you have visited and want to revisit in the future. Maybe make a few notes about what you found there, what you want to look at more. And then start a folder to collect some of that information that we covered on the last page, saved in a central location where you can get to it easily, or where others in your organization can also get to it. And I think that the next slide is just an invitation for questions. And we have plenty of time for those. And if we don't have questions, I will also take requests to do a demonstration of grants.gov or usaspending.gov for funding announcements.
This is Dorothy Williams, New Beginnings. One of those slides, it mentioned something about indirect cost.
Mhm.
Can you give an example of what an indirect cost would be?
Yes, so indirect costs are costs that are shared costs that are cannot be specifically identified with the program that you're proposing, but they're shared costs across your organization. So these are things that are like your phone bill or your rent. So they might be shared across multiple programs. For us at the university, we have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate called our facilities and administrative cost rate. So that covers the cost of our facilities, our buildings, our rent, our lights, plus the cost of administration. So our legal department, our human subjects review department, all of that gets rolled into that rate. It's at the university, it's very high because there are a lot of resources that go into those indirect costs that are shared across thousands of projects at the university. And that rate's determined with a federal agency, and it's a percentage then that we apply to the direct cost of the program. So the direct costs of the program are things like our program staff time, a percentage of their time dedicated to a project, supplies dedicated to that project, For us, research participants might receive funds. So those are all direct costs, and then we apply a percentage that determines what is the indirect cost, the portion of indirect costs that should be allocated to that project.
Okay, thank you.
And also what I will say about indirect costs, if you don't have a federally negotiated rate on federal awards, under what is called the uniform guidance, which are kind of the rules for grant administration on federal awards, organizations are allowed to request a 10% minimum indirect de minimis indirect cost rate if they do not have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate.
Okay, thank you.
There is a question in the chat, Robin.
Okay.
I can read it. So Joel is asking, so they recently tried to apply for a USDA grant and then got the message that in order to apply for a grant opportunity, your organization must authorize you to create a workspace or add you to an existing workspace. Could you just talk a little bit more about that and show where in grants.gov someone can do that?
Yes, I will try to show you where you can do that. Let me go to grants.gov here, which it keeps kicking me out of my login. So hopefully we don't need my login, but I will log in if we need to.
I can also log in if we need to.
Okay, so there are a couple of parts of this question. So first of all, your organization to apply for USD grants going to need that sam.gov registration. And then it's also going to need an applicant registration. So under this applicants tab, there are, there's a number of resources here, how to apply for grants, workspace overview, applicant eligibility, and applicant registration. So you would want to read this and make sure that, so it's going to ask you here, is your organization already registered in sam.gov? And then hopefully it's going to tell you, somewhere it's going to down here at the bottom, begin your grants.gov registration. So your organization needs a grants.gov registration with an AOR, an authorized organization representative. So that's like your organization's registration. And then also the individual working on the application. So if that individual is different from your AOR, that individual needs their own workspace application. So let's say your organization already had one, but you didn't as an individual, you need to create your own workspace. I'm sorry, your own grants.gov account, and then affiliate it with your organization. And that's going to be affiliated based on that unique entity identifier. Once you're affiliated with your organization, you need to make sure that you have a role as a workspace owner. And then once you have that role as a workspace owner, then you can generate an application and work on it. If you are working on it as an owner and you are not that authorized representative, then you cannot directly submit the grant. The authorized representative will have to go in, review what you've put into the application, and then approve the grant to be submitted. So all of that, I know that's kind of a little bit confusing, but it is all in here. What I would say is go to this page and start at the very beginning. Do we have a sam.gov registration for our organization? If yes, do we have a grants.gov registration for our organization? If yes, does it have an AOR account? Okay, so then from there, are we going to apply from our AOR account, or am I going to do the application and then have the AOR submit it? Does that answer the question, or do you need me to show you? I'm not sure that I can. The problem is I can't show you too far, once I get too far in here, it doesn't let me go past certain points for registrations. But if you do kind of click through, it will take you to different pages. It just took me in a loop. Okay. But it will take you to different pages. And you can see some of the information that's required.
Joel's writing in the chat that answered the question.
Okay, great.
There is another question.
Mhm.
This one's about fund matching, especially for federal level grants. So this is a great question because I think a lot of the folks here are small organizations. So this person is saying, since my organization is small and doesn't have the ability to find 25,000, for example, or whatever the amount is for matching, how might they navigate that situation?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. So I would look at the funding opportunity or the call for proposals a little closer and see if they give you a description of what is allowed for matching first, because you always need to look at the funding opportunity to see what's allowed. Some may have a specific requirement for the type of matching. But a lot of the matching that I see is in kind. And a lot of times that's people's effort or their, the time that they work on the project that maybe is not paid by the project. And what you can do, as long as in-kind matching is allowed, what you can do is budget that time for that person as if we're budgeting it for a grant. So let's say, you take that person, you're going to say it's 10% of that person's time. So take their salary times 10% and then apply any fringe benefits to that. And it comes up with a dollar amount of the value of that in-kind contribution for that 10% of their time that they're going to work on the project. That's going to be donated to the project rather than being paid directly on the grant. And so you could use that as matching as long as that type of matching is allowed by the organization. Another way that you might be able to get matching is to share the burden across a partner. So if you take on a partner, perhaps you can come up with half of the matching and they can come up with half of the matching. Although if you take on a partner, they may require funding for, personnel on their project. So that may not be feasible if it's not a large amount of funding.
All right, there aren't any other questions in the chat. I'm giving folks just another second to see if they have questions while we have our speakers here. And if you also want to come off mute and ask your question, please feel free to. Okay, folks might be digesting because I know this is a lot of information.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. So what I can do is a quick demonstration of usaspending.gov, and then we can wrap up. If anyone does have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. Okay, so I do kind of enjoy this website. So this is a good way to find out, like maybe you don't know a lot about, like, I'm interested in government funding, but I don't know a lot about it. I don't know what agencies are out there. I don't know what type of grants they offer. So this is a history of that spending for all government agencies. And this will also show you contracts as well. So this is all government spending. So this is the award search, advanced search tool here. And I'm going to add some filters in here because if I just kind of tried to get all funding, it would spin because there's a lot of funding out there that's been awarded. There is a keyword search, which I'm going to avoid for right now. So I'm going to just do the last fiscal year. Maybe the last, I'm gonna deal FY22 because I think FY23 is maybe not over yet. And then I'm gonna look for just grants. So as I mentioned, this has contracts in it as well. I'm not gonna bother with those. And then if I was interested in a specific agency, I could select that there, but maybe I don't know a lot about agencies right now, so I'm gonna skip that. But maybe I want to know, you know, who, you know, in our area, you know, what kind of agencies have been funding things in our area. So I'm going to go all the way down to Cook County. You can go all the way down to the congressional district if you want, or zip code. And then there's recipient type. So I want to see just nonprofit recipients in this example. And there's some other filters there. I don't think I'm interested in any of those. Then I'll submit my search. And it's going through a lot of data, so it's going to take a minute. I think I needed to add that filter. All right, so it just spit out some results here. And what's nice is this has different views, so we can see a map. Oh, it's gonna. All right, so this one didn't, when it was doing its returning the search results, it did not have the state and county filter on it. That's why it took a long time. So we're actually seeing here is all nonprofit grants across the United States, which is interesting. You can see that certain states have the highest kind of amount of nonprofit grant funding to nonprofits. And then, you know, Illinois is in the middle there. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to see if we can hit submit search again and if it's going to filter down to Illinois now that yep. So now it's filtered down to Illinois. I can view by awarding agencies. So I find that this is kind of one of the most interesting things here. So I can see that the Department of Health and Human Services has provided the most funding to nonprofits in Cook County. Department of Justice, Labor, and Commerce, and Education kind of follow that. You can see that USDA has kind of the least amount here. Someone said they were interested in USDA funding, so I'll click on that to see what, you know, if I drill down, what do I see here? And this will give me some information about USDA spending. And then these are sub components of USDA, so we can see the Food and Nutrition Services has the most funding. But there are other programs in here that maybe I'm more interested in. Those are a better fit for what I'm trying to do. And then you can drill down here and get lists of specific grants, contracts, and that kind of information as you drill down. So each time you drill down, you get more information. So it is kind of a rabbit hole because you follow one little breadcrumb and then you're in another place all of a sudden. Because so we started out looking at what's in Cook County and we ended up in kind of what does the USDA's funding program look like. But this is just a nice way to explore government funding and get a feel for what's out there. In one of those earlier lists that I showed you, there were actually the names of the grantees, so you can see which nonprofit organizations are receiving funding. They may or may not have a title or some kind of explanation of what that funding was for. Any questions about that? All righty. Well, if there are no more questions, we could give folks a longer break if we. A little bit longer break. Use the restroom, eat some food if you weren't eating during this session. And come back at, what time do you want folks to come back at?
So I think we're gonna do a 10-minute break still.
Okay,
If that means we come back at 2:00.
okay,
Um,
come back at 2.
Before we let folks go for the break, can we just give a round of applause for our speakers? Robin and Olivia, it's a lot of information and you all condensed it really tightly for us in a really understandable way. So I see folks are doing the virtual emojis. I love it. I love to see that. Thank you both for joining us, doing some exercises with us. If there are questions, we will pass them on to you after this, but thank you so much again. And then we'll go on a 10-minute break. So let's see people back here at 2:00.
Thank you.